The next presentation is Ararat Şekeryan's presentation. Again, let me introduce him to you. Şekeryan was born in Istanbul in 1987. He studied Russian language and literature in Istanbul University. He had worked in Aras Publishing House as part-time and full-time redactor and editor between 2006 and 2014. He received master's degree from Istanbul Bilgi University Comparative Literature Department with the thesis named Literature and Catastrophe, Shant Journal and Vahan Yerjanyan Poems on September 2015. Currently, he is working as Armenian literature teacher in Getrogan Armenian High School. And the title of his presentation is From Rebirth to Death, Armenian Intelligentsia and Lost Anthems of Western Armenia, 1918-1919. Please, Ararat.
Şimdi çalışıyor. Ya
I'm not thanking organizers because they have thanked enough. I would like to thank translators instead. Although it looks quite simple, they are doing a great job there, and no one has thanked them so far. I would like to thank them. I will make my presentation in Turkish.
Türkçe sunacağım ama kullandığım
But the verses I will show you in my presentation will be in English and Armenian. Firstly, let me explain how I decided to research this. Before me, my brother Ari investigated Armenian journals and periodicals. So I feel like a young person who has actually borrowed the shirt of his elder brother. There is an important thesis according to which, after the genocide, well, it's about the national identity formation after the genocide on the basis of the literary works. I had read the doctorate thesis about it. I got very excited, and I wanted to conduct a similar study. And I looked for ordinary poetry, and then I decided to do this in the library of the Patriarchy. So it was closed for a long period of time. 2 weeks, 3 weeks I decided. I couldn't find anyone. Then I went to Yerevan in the Challenge Library, the Literature and Art Library. I discovered the periodical which is called Shant, which had never been examined before. And I thought that Krikor actually had studied it, but it was not the case. Krikor said that what's called the Veratsnund, I mean rebirth, started in Izmir in 1919 after Montrose Treaty. So what Shant periodical shows us that what's called Veratsnund was actually born in Istanbul 15 days after Montrose Treaty by Meruzhan Barsamyan. So Meruzhan Barsamyan takes two important actions. Meanwhile, Montrose Treaty was signed in 1989. It was the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, and it was the treaty which divided the lands of the Ottoman Empire between Western powers. Then the Paris negotiations will start. But Meruzhan Barsamyan actually hid in Istanbul, and after that actually he published again that periodical called Shant. So no one has investigated this, examined this journal before. I think Mariam Hostamyan, an academic in Armenia, had conducted a study, but he says that in terms of the content, it was the journal of the Tashnekin organization in Istanbul. That's a gross mistake, because there is another periodical which is called Shant in Yerevan. That's something different. So that's a mistake to actually confuse between these two. Meruzhan Barsamyan was not a partisan before the genocide. He was just an artist. He used to write love poetry, but after the genocide he said that the only partisanship should be Armenianness, so we have nothing to do with Anchekians, Tashnekians. So, during the Hamidian massacres, Barsamyans used to live in Erzincan. Actually, there were a lot of artists, Armenian artists in Erzincan back then. Mirjan Barsamyan's father was killed when he was 13 years old in 1896 during Hamidian massacres. He witnessed his father's massacre, death, and then he took refuge in the Armash monastery. And for 4 years he studied French and Armenian literature, and then he started to write poetry. So 1908 is an important date because it's the second Meşrutiyet reform during Ottoman Empire, and then he set up a publishing house in one of the back streets of the Galata Tower. What was the name of that street? Anyway, so he became the publisher of the important writers of that period. The reason he created the Shant periodical is that I will try to concentrate on the transformation, that idea of transformation among Armenians. He said after 1908, Armenian poems gave up art and started engaging in politics because a parliament, an Ottoman parliament, had been created with the participation of the Armenians as well, he said. Politics has never been so important. So I'm skipping this part. He said Turkey, Armenians in Turkey. Well, 1908 was an unlucky death. He talks about the censorship of the Hamidian regime. That's an important example because for 30 years so it's about the Kılıçdağı, a censorship against the publication of for 30 years. But after the second reform, Meşrutiyet, he is more tolerant. He said. So how did Barsamyan survive? He was one of the important intellectuals of that period. On 24th of April, he heard that all of his friends had gathered, so he took refuge in the Bulgarian hospital. It's about 1 kilometer away from here. Today it is Turkey hospital. He has money because he is a publisher, and then he goes to the Bulgarian hospital, says, I have a lot of, well, this problem, that problem, actually. So he lives in the hospital for 1 year, and he creates for novels, one poetry book, and in the course of 1 year of his refuge in the hospital. And after 1 year, the guys found out that he was Armenian, and he said, you cannot stay here any longer. As the streets were still dangerous for Armenians, he was enrolled in army. So he actually gave a lot of, money to some officers to get enrolled in the army. He said, my name is Merican. He finds a Turkish name and he gets enrolled in the army. So during the military service, well, he gives bribery to the officers in the army to stay there in the army. And he works in the official, army's publication house. Immediately after that, after the Montrose Treaty, he says in the first publication of Shant, in this massacre we shook up the world. So keeping Shant as a literary and artistic publication would be very funny after the genocide. Shant will dedicate itself from now on to a social cause. You see the Armenian and the English versions. So that will be a publication of not only Armenian intellectuals but also the Armenian nation. Wasn't it the publication of Armenian nation before it? We are all like a baby reborn, and we have our eyes wide open and watching what's happening around. So there is a sense of rebirth. The focus is in rebirth. So you see how Merican Barsamyan actually changed and his periodical changed. So he has an article titled 1375. That's the date when the first Armenian entity kingdom was collapsed. So he says Armenians are still there in Anatolia. The Great Armenia declared its independence, and for 5.5 centuries we had a dream which came true. We will no longer have fear. Aras and Euphrates will not be full of blood of the Armenians, and there will no longer be those pan-Turkic soldiers resounding in those valleys. Armenia, so you are my sweet homeland, and you are ours. Open your arms so that we can approach you with the mourning of our martyrs in our heart, and let's come to dedicate ourselves to Verasnut, to rebirth, he says. When we saw this, of course, what do the existing Armenians say? They say all these lands belong to them. So that's the map submitted to the Paris Peace Treaty. Armenians demanded all this territory, but the basis was not that all those lands belonged to them before, because the existing current Armenians have some, prejudices. They don't conduct enough research before making claims. Armenians say in Kılıçdağı, in Pontus, in Black Sea we are a minority. Yes, we know that, but we are the only people who can establish a democratic state in this region. So give us these lands so that we can recognize the rights of all the other minorities who would live under our, potential Armenian state. There are also Western powers who would give Armenians the right to establish such a state. So he considers Western states as apostles of justice. Let's look at the last paragraph. I made a bad use of time. He says, we learned from the experiences of centuries. We need to put aside the negative sides relating to our race, and in order to establish the perfect state, we have to convert into perfect individuals. He says, let's put aside our negative sides, and you should become from now on perfect individuals. And in the last one, he says, everyone's eyes are turned on us. And he says, asks Armenians to appreciate the magnanimity of Western powers. And he says that Armenians should be mentally united. He talks about the great state and the great Armenian nation. So, although he was living in Istanbul, he was aware of what happened. He was aware of the fact that, he says 1.5 million people were killed, and Anatolia, Asia Minor became the grave of all these people. Hamazkayan's poetry were also published in his chant. He says to Armenians, Siamat, one of our big poets was killed, but his brother is still living. So he refers to the idea of rebirth. And the second was the national hymn. He says, we created our state, but we don't have a national hymn. All the civilized Western states, the French have La Marseillaise, the British have God Save the Queen, why don't we have a national hymn? He says. And he actually launches a competition for national hymns, and he offers, promises a lot of votes, prizes, and he encourages the artists and Armenians to write down a national hymn so that that will be the national hymn of the Western Armenia. And there are a lot of musical activities back then in Istanbul. Parsekretyan and a lot of other musical bands, etc. So there was a musical rebirth among the community. That was right. So that competition for the national hymn was interesting. No one got interested in that. Everyone actually was interested in Paris Peace Treaty to see if they would be given the lands they were promised. So Barsamyan had made a very premature attempt. And he finds it very strange that this competition finds no interest among the community. And he receives some actually entries from the European countries, interestingly, and then he selects some of these, makes a short list, and submits this to the voting of the people, he says. And he does this to create the national hymn of the Western Armenia. There are a couple of examples, some entries. Some of these are very long, take a whole page. Barsamyan claims that the persecution of Armenians still continue and the Kemalist movement still assault Armenian villages, and that these Armenians are still subjected to violence. He says this 4 months after the Paris peace talks. Until the last publication of Hrant, the date when he went to Paris, he writes nothing anymore about the national hymn. He says, national hymns need to be simple, full of emotion. Well, but we will see that in none of the entries none of the entries fit this definition. He said that national hymns should not be ornamented. National hymns should touch the soul of the nation. Most of the time, the writers of the good national hymns are ordinary people. And at the end, he says, there were just 12 people in the voting of the selection of the best national hymn. So although he made so many efforts during that Montrose Treaty, there were just 12 entries, and the first one which was selected received only 3 votes. But the poetry, the entries are really bad, you'll see that. He says that when the Armenian state is established, at the end of the day anyway, we would promise a big prize, and we would have our one single national hymn. So I just asked for 2 or 3 minutes. Yesterday I remember someone who used a 30 minutes in addition. Okay, I will not exceed 20 minutes. Or else I will do a voluntary work for the foundation if you give me additional time. So why was that national hymn competition unsuccessful? I had presented the former version of this presentation in Michigan. If you are interested, you can understand in more detail why that national hymn competition was unsuccessful. So, from rebirth to disappearance in 10 months, how did this transition happen? Those Armenian intellectuals who survived 1915. In 1908, Barsamyan, had a different opinion of arts and politics, and later on he adopted political responsibility. He said to create perfect individual, well, he launched the national hymn competition. He also recreated Siamanto's brother, who was a lawyer. He made him a poet, and he paved the way for Rebirth. So, you see, these are poetry talking about 1915. These are not national hymns. He says that none of these look like Marseillaise, none of these look like the British national hymn. So he's a bit angry at Armenians. He doesn't find the quality very good. So most of these are about fight and oppression. So there are some very complicated structures in these national hymns, and some words like selected from dictionaries. And without the assistance of an expert, I would not be able to understand some of the words used in these national hymns. I wouldn't be able to translate this into English or Turkish. The structures are really very complicated, Well, they try to give the message that Armenians are still strong, that they still write poetry, etc. And they say to the Armenian people, stop crying and weeping, etc. What's interesting is that there is not mentioning of Aswats. There is just one mentioning of this. There is no single religious reference to God in national hymns. That's interesting. It seems that was called Ureyri Rasvas from that perspective. I believe we can have that perspective after the genocide. It's obvious. So last two slides. Barsamyan goes and in Paris, he says, I become French, I become a French citizen, I disconnect to sever all my links with Armenians. You know, during the Second World War, actually, you know, he doesn't talk to the other Armenians. He says, I have become a French. His name, he adopts the French name Jean Neru, and he continues to write in French. So Merucan, he was Merucan, he had adopted the name Mercan. Now he went through a traumatic, well, very radical change. He decides to become a French person. The most important thing, we believe that 1915 is the end of everything, but during the first year of the treaty, among intellectuals, the intellectuals were really convinced and sure that the rebirth would come true. They had already actually survived a lot of massacres. Yerok Armen says something. I would like to conclude it. The main problem is not the killing of people. The main issue is the failure to provide them with a country in which they can live, so not having a country of themselves. So I can ask for an additional 1 minute. Third, Pamukçuyan is an important, well, he was an amateur historian of the Istanbul Armenian community. For 60-65 years, he tried to discover the secret events of Armenian history. That tombstone touched me a lot. As I lost my mother very early, part of my actual childhood was spent in the cemetery. So I'm interested in tombstones. That's what is written. So, Kavur Pamukçuyan, philologist who works more for the interest of other people than for himself. So, a short time ago, it was the 20th anniversary of the death of Ararat Pamukçuyan. No one commemorated it. There was no news of him in the Istanbul press. But today there were even theses in Turkish universities, in Ankara University, about his works. But our community did not remember it. That's all. Thank you.